the mapmaker's ghost, the anonymous traveler who opened the West. In the spring of 1805, when Lewis and Clark were struggling through the Bitterroot Mountains, nearly dead from starvation and cold, they found something that saved their lives: a map. Not a crude drawing scratched in dirt. A real map. Detailed, accurate, showing mountain passes they couldn't see, rivers they hadn't discovered, distances calculated with remarkable precision. The map was carved into a piece of birch bark, weathered and old, tucked into a cairn of stones at a mountain pass 8,000 feet above sea level. The map showed them the way through the mountains. Without it, the Lewis and Clark expedition would likely have died in the Bitterroots. American history would have unfolded differently. Lewis mentioned the map in his journals, calling it a providential discovery and the work of an unknown hand, possessed of geographic knowledge far exceeding our own. But he never asked the crucial question: who made it? Someone had traveled through those mountains before Lewis and Clark. Someone had mapped every pass, every river, every valley with extraordinary accuracy. Someone had left that map there, deliberately, as if they knew other travelers would need it. And then that someone disappeared from history completely. No name, no record, no trace. This is the story of the mapmaker, an anonymous traveler who crossed the American West decades before Lewis and Clark, leaving behind dozens of maps that guided the famous expeditions we celebrate today. Maps that opened the West. Maps that changed the course of American history. And nobody knows who made them. The first documented discovery of one of the mapmaker's charts was in 1784, in western Pennsylvania. A surveyor named Thomas Hutchins was mapping territory for the newly formed United States government when he found a detailed chart carved into a large flat rock near the Allegheny River. The chart showed the river system of western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio with remarkable accuracy, more accurate than any European map of the region. It included tributary streams that wouldn't be discovered by American surveyors for another decade. It showed Native American settlements with precision. Hutchins copied the chart carefully and included it in his survey report. He assumed it was Native American in origin. Who else would have such detailed knowledge of the region? But there was something odd about the chart. It used European cartographic conventions, latitude and longitude markers, scale notations, compass roses. Native American maps typically used different methods: pictographic representations, narrative journey markers, relationship-based geography. This map was made by someone trained in European surveying techniques, but no European surveyor had traveled that region before Hutchins, or so everyone believed. Hutchins filed his report and the discovery was forgotten. The chart was attributed to unknown indigenous mapmakers and filed away in government archives. The second discovery came in 1796 in Kentucky. Daniel Boone, already famous as a frontiersman, was leading a group of settlers through the Cumberland Gap when they found a cairn of stones at a mountain overlook. Inside the cairn was a piece of leather, carefully preserved, with a detailed map of Kentucky and Tennessee carved into it. The map was astonishingly accurate. It showed terrain features Boone himself hadn't discovered yet. It indicated the best routes through the mountains, the locations of reliable water sources, even seasonal flooding patterns of major rivers. Boone kept the map and used it for the rest of his life. He showed it to other frontiersmen who copied it, who used those copies to guide their own explorations. Within a decade, dozens of hand-copied versions of the mapmaker's Kentucky chart were circulating among settlers. But nobody knew where the original had come from. Boone insisted he'd found it in the cairn, weathered and old, clearly predating his own explorations of Kentucky in the 1770s. Someone had mapped Kentucky before Daniel Boone. Someone had left that map where travelers would find it. Someone whose name Boone never learned. The third discovery came in 1803, during the negotiations for the Louisiana Purchase. A French cartographer named Guillaume Delisle was reviewing maps of the territory France was selling to the United States when he found something unusual in the archives. A detailed map of the Missouri River Valley, attributed to anonymous source, circa 1790. The map showed the Missouri River from its confluence with the Mississippi all the way to the Rocky Mountains, territory that no European or American was known to have explored in 1790. It included accurate distance calculations, terrain descriptions, and notes about Native American tribes in the region. Delisle couldn't determine who had made the map or how it had ended up in French archives. The notation, anonymous source, suggested even the French officials who'd received it didn't know its origin. But the map was used. When President Jefferson commissioned Lewis and Clark to explore the Louisiana Territory in 1804, they were given copies of several existing maps, including the anonymous Missouri River chart. They used it to plan their route, and they found it remarkably accurate. By 1805, when Lewis and Clark were in the Bitterroot Mountains, a pattern was emerging, though nobody had recognized it yet. Detailed, accurate maps were appearing across the American frontier, always in places where travelers would find them, always showing terrain that supposedly hadn't been explored yet, always anonymous. And then Lewis found the birch bark map that saved his expedition. Meriwether Lewis was a meticulous journal keeper. He recorded everything: plant species, animal sightings, weather conditions, interactions with native tribes, and he recorded in detail the discovery of the birch bark map. The entry is dated May 12, 1805. We discovered today at the summit of a particularly difficult pass a cairn of stones clearly constructed by human hands. Upon investigation, we found within the cairn a piece of birch bark, preserved by some unknown method, upon which was carved the most extraordinary map. The map shows our current location with precision that astounds me. It depicts the mountain range we are crossing, including passes and routes we have not yet discovered. It shows rivers beyond the mountains, flowing westward, toward the Pacific, I presume. The detail is remarkable. The cartographic skill evident in its construction far exceeds my own capabilities. Most mysterious of all, the map includes distance calculations in miles, European miles, not native measures. Whoever made this map was trained in European surveying methods. We are not the first to cross these mountains. Someone came before us, someone who possessed geographic knowledge we lack. And that someone left this map here, deliberately placed where travelers might find it, as a gift to those who would follow. I am overcome with curiosity about the identity of this unknown cartographer. Who were they? When did they travel this route? How did they acquire such precise knowledge? And why did they leave no record of their journey beyond these maps? The men have taken to calling our mysterious benefactor the ghost. For surely only a ghost could travel these mountains, map them with such precision, and leave no trace of their passage beyond these providential charts. Lewis and Clark used the birch bark map to navigate through the Bitterroots. It saved their lives. Without it, they would likely have taken a wrong pass, ended up trapped in impassable terrain, and died of starvation or exposure. The map guided them to a navigable pass, showed them where to find game, indicated the distance to the next water source. Everything on the map was accurate. When the expedition reached the Pacific Ocean in November 1805, Lewis made copies of all the maps they'd found or used during their journey, including the birch bark chart. These copies were sent back to President Jefferson as part of the expedition's reports. Jefferson was fascinated. He wrote to Lewis asking about the origins of the anonymous maps. Lewis could only reply, "I do not know, Mr. President, but whoever made them possessed geographic knowledge that challenges our understanding of who has explored this continent." The birch bark map itself was lost. Lewis carried it with him on the return journey, but somewhere between the Pacific and St. Louis, it disappeared. Some accounts say it was stolen. Others say Lewis lost it during a river crossing. Still others claim he gave it to a Native American guide as a gift. But the copies survived, and historians studying those copies in the early 1800s began to notice something. The handwriting on the various anonymous maps, the Pennsylvania chart, the Kentucky leather map, the Missouri River map, the birch bark chart, was remarkably similar. Not identical. The materials varied, the techniques differed, but the style was consistent. The way the mapmaker drew river curves, the notation system for distances, the placement of compass roses, all showed the same hand, the same training, the same methodology. It appeared that all these maps, found across thousands of miles of frontier territory, spanning 2 decades, had been made by the same person. Someone had traveled from Pennsylvania to the Pacific Ocean between 1780 and 1805, mapping everything, leaving charts for those who would follow. And nobody knew who they were. The first serious attempt to identify the mapmaker came in 1847, when historian Francis Parkman was researching frontier exploration for his book, The Oregon Trail. Parkman was intrigued by references in Lewis and Clark's journals to the anonymous maps and decided to investigate. He spent 3 years tracking down every mention of mysterious frontier maps in expedition journals, surveyor reports, and settler accounts. What he found was remarkable. Between 1784 and 1808, at least 47 separate discoveries of detailed, accurate maps were recorded across the American frontier. The maps spanned from western Pennsylvania to the Pacific Ocean. They covered the Ohio River Valley, the Cumberland Gap region, the Missouri River, the Yellowstone, the Columbia River, and multiple passes through the Rocky Mountains. All of the maps showed terrain that hadn't been officially explored yet. All were found in cairns or other deliberate hiding places along major travel routes. All were anonymous, and the cartographic style of all 47 maps was remarkably consistent. Parkman concluded that one person, or possibly a small group working together, had traveled across the entire American West between approximately 1780 and 1805, systematically mapping the territory and leaving charts for future travelers. This was an extraordinary claim. In the 1780s and 1790s, the American West was considered unexplored wilderness. The few Europeans who ventured beyond the Mississippi were fur traders working for British or French companies, and none of them had left such detailed cartographic records. Who could have made these maps? Parkman investigated several theories. Theory 1: a French explorer. France had claim to the Louisiana Territory until 1803. Perhaps the French had sent a secret expedition to map their holdings, and the expedition's records had been lost or suppressed. But Parkman found no evidence in French archives of any such expedition, and the maps used English distance notations, miles rather than leus, suggesting the mapmaker was British or American, not French. Theory 2: a British spy asterisk. Britain and the United States were rivals for control of the Pacific Northwest. Perhaps British intelligence had sent agents to map American territory. But again, no evidence existed in British archives. And why would a British spy leave maps for American explorers to find? It made no strategic sense. Theory 3: a rogue American surveyor. Perhaps an American surveyor had traveled west independently, mapping for personal reasons, and left the charts as a service to future travelers. This was Parkman's favored theory, but he couldn't identify any surveyor with the skills, resources, and opportunity to have made such extensive journeys in that era. And why would such a person remain completely anonymous? Parkman published his findings in 1850, concluding, "The identity of the mapmaker remains one of the great mysteries of American exploration. Whoever they were, their contributions to opening the West were as significant as those of Lewis and Clark, Daniel Boone, or any of the famous frontiersmen we celebrate. Yet they sought no fame, left no name, and vanished into history like a ghost. The mapmaker remained a historical curiosity for the next century, occasionally mentioned in books about Western exploration, but never seriously investigated. Then, in 1957, something remarkable happened. A graduate student at the University of Montana named Sarah Chen was researching her thesis on early American cartography when she discovered something in the university's archives. A leather-bound journal, unmarked, dated 1790-11805. The journal had been donated to the university in 1923 by the estate of a settler family, along with boxes of other historical documents. Nobody had examined it carefully. It had been catalogued simply as Anonymous Frontier Journal, circa 1800, and shelved. Chen opened the journal and found herself reading the daily entries of someone traveling across the American West in the 1790s. Someone who was mapping everything they saw. The journal was written in English, in a clear, educated hand, but it contained no name. The author referred to themselves only as I or the traveler. No personal details, no indication of where they came from or why they were traveling. But the journal described, in meticulous detail, a journey that began in Pittsburgh in 1791 and ended at the Pacific Ocean in 1805. 14 years of continuous travel, mapping the American frontier. The journal entries matched perfectly with the locations where the anonymous maps had been found. The author described creating maps and leaving them in cairns for those who will come after. They described the techniques they used for surveying, the instruments they carried, the challenges of mapping unknown terrain. Chen had found the mapmaker's journal. She spent the next 2 years analyzing it, cross-referencing it with historical records, attempting to identify the author. What emerged was the story of one of the most extraordinary journeys in American history, a journey that had been completely forgotten. The journal begins in Pittsburgh, October 3, 1791. I begin this journey today, leaving behind all that I was, taking with me only what I need: instruments for surveying, materials for map-making, supplies for travel, and a determination to see what lies beyond the edge of the known world. I will not record my name in this journal. That is deliberate. What I am about to do, I do not do for fame or recognition. I do it because it needs to be done. The West must be mapped, not for conquest or commerce, but so that those who come after me will not die lost in the wilderness. I have witnessed too much death in these mountains. Travelers who perished because they took wrong paths, who starved because they couldn't find the passes, who died of thirst because they didn't know where the rivers flowed. I have the skills to prevent such deaths. I have training in surveying and cartography. I have resources sufficient for extended travel. I have no family obligations binding me to any location. So I will go west. I will map everything, and I will leave my maps where travelers will find them, not sold, not hoarded, but freely given to anyone who needs them. This is my purpose. This will be my legacy. Not a name in history books, but trails marked, routes charted, lives saved by knowledge freely shared. I begin today. The journal entries that follow describe a methodical, systematic exploration of the American West. The author traveled alone, with pack horses carrying surveying equipment. They moved slowly, carefully, measuring distances, calculating elevations, mapping river systems. They interacted with Native American tribes, learning from them, trading with them, sometimes traveling with them for weeks at a time. The journal shows deep respect for indigenous knowledge and includes detailed notes about Native American geography, place names, and travel routes. In winter, the traveler would stop, find shelter, sometimes with native tribes, sometimes alone, and spend the cold months transferring field notes onto permanent maps. Then, as spring came, they'd continue westward. The journal describes creating the Pennsylvania chart in 1792, the Kentucky leather map in 1795, the Missouri River map in 1798. Each map was carefully constructed, tested against the terrain, refined until it was as accurate as possible. And each map was left in a cairn or cache at a strategic location. Mountain passes, river crossings, trail junctions, places where travelers would naturally pause and might notice a pile of stones that didn't quite belong. The journal entry from May 11th, 1805, describes creating the birch bark map that Lewis and Clark would find the next day. I have reached the summit of a difficult pass through these mountains. From here, I can see the western rivers beginning their flow toward the Pacific. I am close now. Perhaps another year of travel will bring me to the ocean. But I know others will come this way. This pass is the best route through these mountains for hundreds of miles in either direction. Any expedition attempting to cross the Rockies will likely find this pass eventually. I have prepared a map showing the route ahead. I cannot know when others will arrive, perhaps in a year, perhaps in a decade. But when they come, cold and exhausted as I am now, they will need guidance. I have carved the map onto birch bark, which preserves well in this climate. I have placed it in a cairn at the pass summit, where any traveler would naturally rest and might notice the stones. If they find it, if they use it, if it saves their lives, that will be sufficient. They need not know my name. The map is enough. Lewis and Clark found that cairn the next day. The journal continues through the winter of 1805-1806, which the traveler spent on the Pacific coast, mapping the Columbia River system. The entries describe the satisfaction of reaching the ocean, of completing the transcontinental journey. But they also describe loneliness, 14 years of solitary travel, no family, no companions beyond temporary guides, no one to share the achievement with. The final entry is dated March 15, 1806. I have completed my work. The maps are made. The routes are charted. From Pittsburgh to the Pacific, the paths are marked. I have left 47 maps in cairns across the frontier. I have marked every major river crossing, every mountain pass, every reliable water source. Those who come after me will have the knowledge they need. They will not die lost, as so many have. This was my purpose, and it is fulfilled. Now I face a question I have avoided for 14 years. What next? I could return east. I could reclaim my former life such as it was. I could publish my maps under my own name, claim credit for this work, accept whatever recognition might come. But I did not do this work for recognition. I did it because it needed to be done, and adding my name to it now would contradict that purpose. So I will do what I have always intended. I will disappear. The maps will remain. The knowledge will spread. The lives will be saved. And I will be forgotten, as I wish to be. This is my final entry. I leave this journal in a cache near Fort Clatsop, along with my surveying instruments and the last of my maps. Perhaps someday someone will find it. Perhaps they will wonder who I was. Let them wonder. The work is what matters. The work endures. The traveler goes on. That is the last entry. The journal ends there. Sarah Chen's research revealed that the journal was found in 1923 by a descendant of the settler family who had discovered a cache near the site of Fort Clatsop. The cache had contained the journal, several surveying instruments, and a collection of maps that the family had used but not considered particularly valuable or historically significant. The family eventually donated the materials to the University of Montana, where they sat unexamined for 34 years until Chen found them. Chen published her findings in 1959. Her doctoral thesis, The Anonymous Mapmaker, A Lost Journey of American Exploration, created a sensation in academic circles. Here was proof that someone had crossed the American West before Lewis and Clark. Someone who had mapped the territory systematically, accurately, and left those maps for others to use. Someone who had fundamentally shaped American expansion westward. And nobody knew who they were. Chen spent the rest of her career trying to identify the mapmaker. She analyzed the handwriting, the vocabulary, the references in the journal. She searched through records of surveyors, cartographers, and educated individuals in Pittsburgh and surrounding areas in the 1780s 1790s. She found tantalizingly close matches, but never a definitive answer. The handwriting suggested someone with formal education, likely trained in surveying and mathematics. The vocabulary indicated someone well-read, familiar with classical literature and contemporary science. References in the journal suggested the author had suffered a significant personal loss, possibly the death of family members, that had freed them to undertake such a journey. But the author had been careful. They'd left no identifying details, no references to specific places they'd lived, people they'd known, or events in their past life. It was as if they'd deliberately erased themselves from the journal. Chen developed a theory. The mapmaker was likely someone who had lost their entire family, perhaps to disease, perhaps to violence, and saw in that loss an opportunity to do something meaningful with the skills and resources they possessed. Someone who chose anonymity not out of modesty, but out of a desire to leave behind their former identity entirely. They didn't want to be remembered as whoever they were before, Chen wrote in 1975. They wanted to be remembered only as the work they did, if they were remembered at all. And in a profound way, they succeeded. We remember the maps, we just don't remember the mapmaker. Chen died in 2003, having never definitively identified the mapmaker. Her research notes, thousands of pages, are archived at the University of Montana. Other historians have continued the search. Modern techniques have been applied to the journal, handwriting analysis, linguistic analysis, even attempts at DNA extraction from skin oils on the pages. Nothing conclusive has emerged. What we do know is this. Between 1791 and 1806, someone traveled from Pittsburgh to the Pacific Ocean, systematically mapping the American frontier. They left at least 47 detailed, accurate maps in locations where travelers would find them. Those maps were used by Daniel Boone, Lewis and Clark, and hundreds of other explorers and settlers. The maps fundamentally shaped American westward expansion. They saved lives. They opened routes. They transformed unknown wilderness into mappable territory. Lewis and Clark are celebrated as the first American explorers to reach the Pacific overland, but they used maps made by someone who had done it years earlier. Daniel Boone is famous for opening Kentucky, but he found and used a map made by someone who had charted it before him. Every famous frontier explorer of the early 1800s benefited from the mapmaker's work, and none of them knew who had made those maps. The mapmaker's identity remains unknown. Their journal provides incredible detail about their journey, but reveals nothing about who they were before it began or what happened to them after it ended. They vanished as completely as they intended. Today, if you hike certain trails in the Rockies, trails that follow routes first mapped by the anonymous traveler, you might find cairns that have stood for over 2 centuries. Most of the maps are gone, removed by travelers or destroyed by weather, but the cairns remain. Some hiking groups have started a tradition. When they find one of these historical cairns, they leave a small note inside, acknowledging the mapmaker. The notes usually say something simple. Thank you for the trail. Your work endures. We remember, even if we don't know your name. There's a memorial at the University of Montana where Sarah Chen's research is archived. It's a simple granite marker with an inscription. To the unknown mapmaker who traveled from Pittsburgh to the Pacific, 1791-1806. You sought no fame, you left no name, but you opened the West and we walked the trails you marked. Your legacy is not in history books, but in every journey safely completed, every life saved by knowledge freely shared. We remember the gift, even if we cannot remember the giver. It's not the kind of memorial most historical figures receive. No statue, no grand monument, just a marker acknowledging work done in anonymity. But perhaps that's exactly what the mapmaker would have wanted. I think about the mapmaker sometimes when I'm hiking in the mountains or looking at old maps. I think about someone who possessed extraordinary skills and used them not for personal gain, but to help strangers they'd never meet. Someone who could have been famous, who should be famous, whose accomplishments rivaled any explorer we celebrate, but chose anonymity instead. Someone who understood that the work mattered more than the credit, that lives saved were more valuable than names remembered. There's something profoundly American about that story. Not the conquering hero we usually celebrate, but the quiet helper, the person who did essential work and asked for nothing in return, the anonymous contributor whose efforts made everything else possible. We build our national mythology around individuals: Lewis and Clark, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett. We give them credit for discovering and opening the West. But underneath those famous names are countless anonymous contributors: Native American guides who showed the routes, unrecorded surveyors who mapped the trails, forgotten travelers who left cairns and notes and warnings that saved others' lives. The mapmaker is one of those anonymous contributors, except we have evidence of their work. We have their journal. We know they existed and what they accomplished. We just don't know their name. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the lesson isn't about uncovering the identity, but about recognizing the value of anonymous contribution, about understanding that history is built not just by the famous but by the forgotten. Every trail we walk was walked first by someone whose name we don't know. Every innovation we celebrate built on ideas from people who left no record. Every achievement we attribute to individuals relied on invisible networks of support, guidance, and prior work. The mapmaker represents all of those anonymous contributors. They're the ghost in American history, the presence we can sense but never quite see, the influence we can trace but never quite attribute. Their maps opened the West, their work saved lives. Their contribution to American history is undeniable. But their name is lost, probably forever. And perhaps in some strange way, that makes their story more powerful, not less. Because it reminds us, the work matters more than the recognition. The trail matters more than the name on the marker. The mapmaker understood that. They lived it. They deliberately erased themselves so that only the work would remain. And the work remains. 200 years later, their maps, copied, recopied, incorporated into later surveys, still form the basis of how we understand Western geography. Their routes are still the routes we follow. Their cairns still stand in mountain passes, weathered but enduring. The ghost still guides us, even if we don't know their name. Even if we never will.